Good morning. Welcome to the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. I'm Kim McCleary, President and CEO, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's program. For those of you who would like to ask questions of today's panelists, there's a control panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can type in your questions. Jessica DeGanzik, our Vice President of Events, will be managing your questions during the Q&A portion of today's program, which will start in about 35 minutes. We also prepared a digital booklet for our student attendees, which includes information about our guest speakers, their recent projects, as well as scholarship programs and other helpful resources for students interested in diverse fields relating to global policy. The booklet can be found and downloaded in the handouts section of the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. Our staff will also be sure to email this handout to you after the program. It is now my great pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Creating Opportunity from Crisis, Learning from the Global Consequences of COVID-19, a very special program for all of our high school students out there, so welcome. I'd also like to extend a very special thank you to the Boone Foundation for making today's programming possible. Today's panelists include Catherine Boskill. She is Associate Director at the RAND Center for Global Risk and Security. Marco Hafner, who is a Senior Economist and Research Leader at RAND Europe. Heather Schwartz, who is a Senior Policy Researcher at RAND, and our moderator, Tracy Navachoki, who is an Incubator Program Manager at Global Digital Policy. Tracy, it's so great to have you back moderating for us.
You see me? Hi, everyone. Thank you. It is such a privilege to be back, and I'm so delighted to be joining you, to be helping lead this panel, and to have an opportunity to speak to Heather, Catherine, and Marco, and all the high school students today. Welcome, welcome.
Thanks for having us here. Looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's been one of the nice things, if you can count it as a nice thing, is that we are able to connect despite long distances. I think we may all be in different parts of the country and in different parts of the world. Marco, where are you located?
I'm in the United Kingdom.
All right. And Heather and Catherine, what about you both?
I'm in New Orleans as we speak. Lovely, hot New Orleans.
Very nice.
And I'm here in Los Angeles.
So you're like many of the students in Los Angeles, and I'm in Northern California and Palo Alto. So with that, I'll get started with our questions. And let's start off with Heather. Now, Jessica and has helped convene this, and as Kim was speaking, she mentioned that you are all working at RAND. So can you please describe what RAND is for our students? What is the purpose of a think tank? Who do you work with? And what's one major RAND contribution? Heather?
Sure. So like you said, RAND is a think tank. RAND stands for Research and Development. And the purpose is to provide research to help policymakers make well-informed decisions. That's really the short answer, or in a nutshell. And some think tanks specialize in particular topics. We at RAND, my colleagues and I, work across a wide variety of topics. So RAND does research about education, about criminal justice, about health, about defense. I'm missing many of our topics in that sentence, but I'll just give you one concrete example just so that this seems a little less abstract. I personally oversee surveys that we field to a national set, several thousands of school teachers each year. And so we ask them to take these surveys a couple times throughout the year, and so that we can collect their opinions about various hot topics. So during COVID, we've been asking lots of questions about their experiences doing remote instruction and how it's been going and how many students are completing their assignments and what curricula are they using and so forth and so on. So we collect that information and then we turn around and write short reports that are really intended to help school superintendents or State Department of Education leaders or sometimes people working in state legislature, the federal Congress, to help them know what's going on and provide some recommendations about how to help improve the situation.
Thank you very much for explaining that and for the example. And we'll focus on education since that's one of the policy areas that you mentioned. And I will start with a very difficult question. What's the future of education look like? Many students have been at home for the past year or more, learning virtually. Should we expect that? What will classrooms look like in a few years?
Well, let me get out my crystal ball, and then I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. I do think that for high schoolers especially, there is a good chance that classrooms are going to materially change. I still think that schooling is going to for most students, schooling is still going to be face-to-face in a physical school and not remote. Having said that, I think the classroom, especially for high schoolers, is likely to start to adapt and change. So for example, maybe a high schooler comes in the morning, takes some classes in the sort of traditional, fully in-person, teachers in front of the classroom, students are in at desks. But then there's some mix throughout the day of fully virtual classes or hybrid classes. I think that kind of mixing and matching is going to become more common in high schools and middle schools too, maybe a little less so for elementary grades. And I think we're going to start to see more experimentation with who is teaching students. So instead of only a lead teacher, the certified lead teacher that we think of historically, the math teacher, the science teacher, the writing instructor, and so forth, I can imagine that there might be more mix of paraprofessionals, volunteers, tutors, traditional teachers, and then students going out of the building more towards internships and apprenticeships. We're seeing some pilot programs and experimentation with that. And I think that COVID has really accelerated some of those trends. There's just so much more familiarity with online instruction for good and bad. I think that for the most part, online instruction has been really markedly poor this year. There are some exceptions, and there are some students who've done better, but for the most part, not. So I don't think that remote is just going to take over and that now suddenly kids are, most kids are going to be 100% online. I don't think that's our future, but I can see online being brought into the classroom in ways that really weren't done at scale before the pandemic.
So if we expect an increase in this kind of hybrid learning and a continuation of the remote learning, what sort of policy recommendations have you given or are you planning to give to teachers and to students? When teachers excel, so do students. So it all influences one another. What are you, consulting on? What advice are you giving to superintendents?
Well, we have been making recommendations about this based on what we've been gleaning from our surveys. And so I'll just start with a couple basic ones. If we're really serious about remote instruction, even if it's just going to be a small portion of my day, me, high schooler of 2025, we need to have home broadband access that actually supports me watching synchronous video classes that are live, and that I should not have tech problems 2 days, 3 days of every week, which is the norm for a lot of kids right now. So that's one thing, is we have to solve, and we have recommendations about funding home broadband access. Same thing with devices. If we need to have every single child have a device, not using their parent's cell phone when their parent gets home from work. That's not a realistic way for a student to seriously engage in high quality instruction. So devices, so taking care of the basics, how to connect and the device to get on and use. Then there's teachers really need quality materials to use to engage with kids, and they also need training about how to engage students. It's hard, especially during the pandemic, it's hard to engage students throughout a class with videos being turned off, kids going away, coming back, and teachers not really having the training about, well, how do I adapt my class? Should I break out into small groups? Should I give different types of activities during this class instead of me, teacher, sitting and giving a sort of 20-minute lecture and hoping that my students on the other side of the camera where I can't see them are listening. So it's all about better content, better training about how to interact with students in an engaged way, and giving students and families access to those remote classes. If we're really going to get remote into even a portion of the day, we have to tackle all of those things.
Thank you. And one quick addendum to that, you mentioned better devices, better connectivity. Students may be listening and saying, yes, I do need those things, but how can I access them? Do they reach out to their teachers? Is this, I write to my congressman? But where do you see that change coming? How do we make this more accessible?
I do think, well, it's not on, the burden is not on the student to have to hunt this down and figure it out. Right now there are wheels turning for federal funds to provide better internet access, and it could be through a variety of agencies. It might be school districts leading the charge. It may be counties and cities. So unfortunately, there's no one answer. That's like, it's always going to be your school district superintendent, and wait to hear an email from your district to tell you how it's going to happen. But I do think that there's going to be better and better internet access with federal money, not with families having to pay more money per month to get high-speed internet access. The devices too, I also think that school districts are going to be, so many of them have acquired devices this year, but even more, and figuring out how to maintain them, which is no small task. It's one thing for me to give Tracy, an iPad or a Chromebook right now, but then when it breaks next year, what am I doing with it, and how am I getting it fixed? So that's like kind of a whole new world for school districts to essentially become IT departments. But I do think that basically we're seeing the baby stages of districts figuring out how to deal with this in large numbers and make sure that all students have reliable devices that actually function in their hands.
Thank you. I want to highlight one thing you said. There's no one answer. And I think as you grow older, you start researching, there's never one answer.
Yeah,
there's only one answer
true.
in high school exams, right? If you all been taking the APs, there's always one answer. But once you leave the school setting, it becomes much more complex. And you mentioned broadband connectivity. I want to turn to Catherine and ask you a question related to that. So we're all gathered here today virtually, revealing that technology has enabled our coming together and our social cohesion, but it also exacerbates certain divides that already exist, like connectivity. So as an anthropologist, you're studying human development and societies. What are your observations of our human development in this past year, and how have other countries coped differently?
That's a great question, and again, it's one where we're still thinking about what the implications of COVID will be. Like, will we continue down this particular trend that we've been seeing? And Heather touched on this so nicely with respect to what's going to happen in the classroom. But I suspect in a lot of ways, COVID accelerated a lot of trends that we were already seeing with respect to faster technologies, being incredibly hyper-connected all around the world, really shortening the time and the space that it takes to connect. But of course, one of the big factors here is whether or not people have access to that infrastructure. And so we think about our own country. We have a quarter of our rural citizens who don't have access to broadband. Right. So when we think about all the great opportunities that, say, working from home or, being able to find a new job, a new position, that works, but it doesn't work for everybody. And so this is the time right now. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm actually really proud of this generation. Every time I meet a high school student, I'm really blown away by their awareness of social things that need to change, and this is one of these things where we've got massive opportunities and we've got this technology and it's becoming so much more common, but we got to make sure that these opportunities are available to everyone, right? That they're equitable. So that's just kind of a broader thing to say as opposed to coming from an anthropologist. When I think about anthropology, so anthropology is everything from human evolution to our language systems, right? You can look at linguistic anthropology. You can look at medical anthropology, how we understand our health and our well-being, and social and cultural anthropology. And I like to look at all of these things. And I think that faster technologies that we've seen, really become a necessity in COVID, that they're really impacting all of those various different parts of what it means to be human. It's impacting our brains. It's impacting our mental health and well-being in particular. And it's impacting the way that we connect with each other. So the one thing that I like to ask people to think about as we continue to go faster and as we sort of totally get rid of the need for physical connection in some ways is to think about what is a convenient way, or what's the convenience of going faster? What would we gain from that? And then what do we lose, right? And are there times where we should be thinking about maybe going slower? Times where we should think about connecting with either ourselves or with our neighbors and our friends, and not sort of have it be a quick text message, let's say, right? So happy to go into that, but that's kind of my biggest passion, is really getting people to think about, when do we go faster for convenience? When is it a necessity? And when can we tell ourselves, nope, now is the time to stop and pause and really think about what we're doing and how it feels to us. Because I think that's one way that we'll keep our cultural values, we'll keep this question of equity in our minds, and we'll be able to infuse a lot of like the really important things of connection that really make us human, and I think keep us fulfilled in our lives. So that's my challenge to you guys, because I know what the world is like, without being connected through these fast technologies, but you don't, right? And I don't envy you guys for that. Just think about, again, what does it matter to you in that moment that you're using a faster technology as we go forward? Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to follow up on that, because you really set a high challenge. You don't really choose the time period that you're born in, and when you grew up with a smartphone in your hands, it's difficult to imagine what it would be like to live without it, and it's almost impossible, right? Especially now when you have to learn remotely. I am basing this next question off a brilliant TED Talk that I saw of yours, and I recommend the students to watch it from a few years ago. And you are talking about the unforeseen consequences of a fast-paced life. So can you delve in a little bit more for what that would mean for high school students, and what concrete recommendations do you have for them to counter that speed? So you said look for places where you can slow down, but are there instances, maybe you can relate back to other time periods in history where people have had to slow down, when there were more landlines or the post office was established? We don't use it as often now, but was that a big changing point in history?
Well, I think, like, and I'm not going to go too far into this, but I think one of the biggest things that changed the course of history was trains, the implementation of the train. But like, let's just take the rate of adopting new technologies as an example. So it was 85 years before the majority of Americans had a telephone, and it only took about 10 years before most Americans had a smartphone, right? So, you got this thing that fits in your pocket, and you can absolutely change your life and the lives of a whole bunch of people around you for the better or for the worse, with it, right? So that's kind of amazing. So again, like I mentioned, you guys as students, you don't know a world where you aren't hyper-connected. And what's interesting is that the sort of 25 and under generation is fundamentally different from any previous group in the way that you learn and you access information. You guys have never waited for a pen pal letter. I don't even know if you know what that is, but that used to be. I had a pen pal that lived, in a whole other state, and I had a pen pal that lived in the UK. And you'd sit and you'd write this letter, and then maybe a month later you'd get a response in the mail, right? I mean, imagine that. You never had to wait to develop a photograph, right? You take a photograph, and then it was amazing if you could get that within an hour. You've never visited another country and you've had to lug around a heavy dictionary and flip through and search for some word of how you're going to order that particular dish that you want, or ask somebody to go on a date or whatever it is. And you don't know a different world. So you've always been, the word I think is cosmopolitan, right? You've always been really worldly because you've had this amazing access to information. But a lot of that's been virtual. So you've also been kind of everywhere and nowhere at one time. So you have to find out for yourselves what it means to find a particular place special. because you can access, if you want to go see what the Leaning Tower of Pisa looks like, just Google it, right? You didn't have to go there. So, what is it going to mean to you to actually find a place that's meaningful? How do you think about all the other factors that go into it? Is it telling a joke? Is it hearing music for the first time live? I mean, when we finally get to be able to do that again. So what I want you to do is realize that you haven't ever really had to pause and dig down deep if you get lonely or bored or perplexed or something. You can just look it up, or you can text a friend, or you can go on social media if you're bored. But that's not gonna help us to really truly connect. It's not gonna help us to really truly think critically, and it's not gonna help us to think to build trust, I guess is what I would say. So when you're constantly on digital display, what we know, and I want to empower you guys by saying this, not sort of make you feel doomed, but we've never seen these rates of depression and anxiety that we're seeing in people under 25 right now. And I think a lot of that is coming from a constant FOMO, right? It's fear of missing out. If there's anyone who's my age or older on the call, you live with constant FOMO. You live with the stress of being constantly on display, of being constantly connected, of always having to worry about answering or responding to everything that's happening in a virtual space. But it's not really helping us. So I want you to, again, pause and think, what is it that I really should be doing right now? And there's power in doing that. How do I really connect with people? How does it feel when I'm really connecting with people as opposed to scrolling and liking stuff? Because I think that's a big deal. So let me stop there. But obviously something I'm really passionate about.
No, this is excellent. And even just listening to you helps, I think, all of us pause and really reflect. It's the start of that thought process. And I just want to follow up with a quick just factual clarification. How the rates of depression you said are growing under 25, are those numbers similar across the globe, or do we see it mostly concentrated in bigger cities?
That's a really good question, and yes, it is a global phenomenon, and it's a major public health burden that we're seeing. And I actually would say, I think the kind of depression and anxiety that we're seeing in those who are under 25 is really fundamentally different from what we've seen from any other population or any other cohort, right? And I think that's because the stressors are different that people are facing in their lives. So yeah, it's a global problem for sure. And that's, not to, again, I say that to empower everybody to be thinking about this and not to diminish sort of the unique struggles that people might be going through.
Thank you. And Marco, I want to turn to you. We're speaking about the globe, we're all in the US, but you're in the UK, so you'll provide our global perspective here. So you've done a lot of work with work and even migration. I want to talk about your time at the Center for Research and Analysis of Migration at University College London. What migratory trends have you noticed in the past 5 years, and how does that differ from last year when people have started working from home? I ask this mostly because LA is such a big hub for people coming in and out and moving all the time. So can you give us a response, your general observation, and also mostly geared to the city of LA or bigger cities with that draw?
Sure. I mean, I think migration is an extremely interesting topic, not just for an economist, but generally for everyone, just because I think we all at some point have done a migration decision. Is it temporary? We go maybe to another state, we go on holidays, we go on vacation in Mexico or anywhere else, or even done a permanent migration decision where we go abroad to study for a while. For instance, in my case, I'm originally from Switzerland, then went to study in the UK, and now stay here. My wife is from Colombia, so we have a bit of a multicultural background. We made the UK our home. So everyone has at some point been a bit touched upon on the topic of migration. Yeah, it's also a very politicized topic, and a lot of political backlash is around the topic of migration. A lot of politicians try to use migrants as a scapegoat for a lot of things that are going wrong in the country. They claim sometimes migration is the reason for the increase in crime rates, insecurity, people losing their jobs, a downward pressure on wages of natives. But then actually, when you look at the evidence, specifically, I'm looking from the evidence from an economics perspective. There's almost no evidence suggesting that overall migration has a negative impact. So there's no evidence showing that it tends to take away jobs from natives. In contrast, mostly it actually can create jobs. There's no evidence that it reduces wages of natives, and also no evidence that it tends to increase crime and insecurity. So it's a very interesting topic from that perspective. Now, in terms of the kind of trends, I think obviously long-term trends with globalization that we observe is a lot of people tend to move to other countries because of work or because they study. Traveling has become easier over time with increase in travel modes over the globe. We see a lot of migrants going to other countries to earn a living and then pay remittance to their families in their home countries, which has become a huge driver of economic prosperity as well in those countries, which have become reliable to those monetary transfers. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely this increase of people doing this kind of voluntary decisions in migration, but then we also observe a lot of forced migration because of conflicts globally. So we all have seen probably this migrant streams from the conflict in Syria that have been walking across Europe and trying to enter countries like Germany, Austria, with really powerful pictures in the media around that. And I think this kind of trends will probably increase because of COVID. I mean, obviously we can't necessarily say now how COVID will affect migration flows overall. I'm sure there will be, given what Catherine and Heather already said, given this improvement in technologies, maybe some migration decisions will not be taking place now, and people might be able to study remotely in another country. So you can just enroll in a university. Let's say someone in the UK could enroll in a university in France and still study there without having actually to physically migrate there. So these kind of trends could actually be reversing migration to some extent. Obviously, because of the pandemic, we couldn't travel for a while. There are a lot of restrictions on that, so that has basically reduced migration a lot. At the same time, there are trends that we observe in the UK, but in other countries as well, that migrants actually have left their destination country, went back home because the job opportunities in those countries were not as good. A lot of migrants often work in kind of service-heavy industries, which obviously exposed to a lot of social closeness, which during this pandemic have been hardly affected. And yeah, so these are some of the trends that we observe. At the same time, COVID might increase global inequality. So we see a lot of high-income countries now being able to vaccinate their populations, low-income countries not having that opportunity to that extent, just because they don't have access to vaccines yet and might not have for a couple of years. And that increases these economic inequalities, and that could subsequently again lead to conflicts and inequalities, meaning that migration flows from these countries will increase to other regions. And then obviously we also have these long-term trends in terms of climate change. We could also trigger huge migration flows in the future when certain regions of the world are going to be less habitable and people would have to move.
Thank you for providing that landscape. And I mean, it feels huge, just the amount of people moving and the reasons for movement.
Mm-hmm.
I think Catherine, you said about pausing, just thinking back of where our roots are and kind of where we come from and where our families have been. So even Marco, you were describing where you came from, where you're living now, where your family is. So that's, I think, a good opportunity to stop and reflect. And Marco, I want to follow up with you and ask you about another aspect of your work. And I skimmed one of your reports that you published a few years ago on the economics of why sleep matters. So
yep.
In that report, you advocated for starting school at later times. Why is that? And can you share maybe one surprising reason why students benefit from sleep? We all know, you think better, you think more clearly, but was there anything that surprised you in your findings?
Sure. No, I think the topic of sleep also reflects a bit about what Catherine says, though, in terms of, we all want to go fast and things has to become more productive. And I think a lot of people, if you invent a pill that you don't have to sleep, a lot of people would want to take that just because we think sleep is not necessarily a productive time, and we think like, I would rather watch maybe a little bit more TV or do something else rather than having to go to sleep, or kind of waste my time in that sense. But actually, sleep is equally important as a pillar of health, such as doing physical activity, eating healthy, and it's very important for your mental health and your physical health as well. And this is kind of something we touched upon in the report we did, and tried to understand what some of the economic benefits are of people sleeping more. And then that means if you sleep more, you tend to be healthier, you tend to be, your cognitive abilities are better, and that subsequently has also economic benefits. And now in terms of specifically to school start times, when I started this research for my own personal reasons, because I became a dad of my firstborn daughter, and she was the most awful sleeper you can imagine. So she hasn't slept for probably a year. That means also I didn't sleep at all, and I realized all these negative effects of insufficient sleep by myself. So I got moody, I wasn't productive at work, I got sick a lot, I had a lot of colds and flus and everything you could imagine. So my life was extremely miserable just because I didn't sleep well. And this is kind of how I came to the idea to do this research. And while doing this research, I also came across the fact, kind of this interesting finding that actually, when young people enter puberty, so teenagers, their inner body clock, or the circadian rhythm, changes for a couple of years, meaning that it's becoming more difficult for you to falling asleep. Kind of the normal person tends to start to fall, get tired, and kind of your inner the hormones in your body start to produce melatonin, which regulates your sleep. That usually tends to kick in with kind of in normal ages, kind of ages outside teenage age, but somewhere around 9, 10 in the evening. But for teenagers, this process is delayed by about 2 to 3 hours, meaning that teenagers or young adults are not necessarily being naturally able to fall asleep before 11 p.m. Whereas they often claim that they're just, they want to stay up late, they're lazy in the morning if they can't get up. I'm sure a lot of students had these conversations with their parents, wanted to sleep in the morning instead of going to school just because they're tired, and not in the mood to get up. But there's a natural reason for that. That your circadian rhythm, your inner body clock actually shifts, and that's one of the drivers for that. And that when you have to get up in the morning and go to school very early, I think average school start times in the US are somewhere around 8 a.m. in the morning for high schools. In California, it's at kind of similar at a similar threshold, meaning that if you have a long way to school, kind of have to travel a lot to get to school, you have to get up very early, and that means you're not as attentive in the morning. You probably, when you go to school, is what we call a social jet lag. So you're actually outside your inner body clock, and that means a lot of evidence shows that reduces your cognitive abilities. It's bad for your mental health, your physical health, but also a lot of research showing that it's also negative for your performance in school. And there are other kind of studies showing that it could also lead to car crashes if you're driving to school, because a lack of sleep also has negative effect on the ability for you driving a car, even driving a bicycle. It could lead to a lot of accidents. And within this study, we also try to look at what are some of the economic benefits of that if you would shift school start times a bit later. And subsequently, California introduced the law which mandates that high schools cannot start before 8:30 a.m. in the morning.
Thank you. Maybe some students can chime in the Q&A and share if they've enjoyed starting school later, or they prefer the normal start time, if they relate it to some of the effects that you described. Well, I really appreciate that you've all discussed bits of your work and your research in answering these questions. And I want to introduce some of my work and then ask you your opinions. And I work on digital human rights, and we're studying the erosion of trust when it comes to information in the online ecosystem. That's something that maybe we've heard a lot about: misinformation, what's the truth, can you really trust a source? But while it's becoming very difficult to distinguish between dubious and credible sources online, are there better ways for students to become smarter consumers of digital information? And if you have any recommendations for students, how do you personally locate trustworthy information online and determine whether it's reliable or not. And I leave that to any one of you. If you all want to take it, I'd love to hear from all of you, but maybe Heather, if you have an opinion, we get started with you.
Sure, I have one thing to throw in here, which is, let me preface, I don't have the answers, and I wish I did, but we are doing this really cool study right now on just this topic, and what it involves is a survey of teachers, of principals, of students, and the general public, in which we pose faked and not, we input faked and then not faked videos of people talking about climate change. And the goal is to understand how well the general public, students, teachers, and principals can detect misinformation and can detect which are the fake videos. And then more to the point, what makes people who can't detect it susceptible to not detecting it. The reason there is that's what will help us, give us the information to create effective lesson plans in schools about how students in particular, and teachers and adults alike, can be smarter consumers and ask the right questions to detect fake or misinformation. So Tracy, I wish I had my oh, you know what the students need to do? It's these 5 things. I don't have that neat, tidy answer, but I'm really looking forward to the results of my colleague's study on this deepfake information.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be curious to read that. And I asked that because I'm in the same boat. Our center doesn't have the response. And now that I have listened to your responses, I feel like I am asking you to look into the future. Like, tell us, what are the best ways to slow down? How can we trust each other again and connect? But Marco and Catherine, do you have any insight on this?
I definitely have some thoughts, and you know, again, so Heather, that's super interesting. I actually didn't even know we were doing that work, but it's part of, I would assume, Rand has this bigger initiative called Truth Decay, where we're really trying to look at that, you know, erosion of belief in objective facts. So it's super interesting. But you know, if you think about it, the Pew Research Center, which is another research center in the States that you guys could be looking at if you were interested in going down the path of research. They did a study recently, and they showed that trust in authority is low, but so is trust in each other. So in the US, nearly half of young adults, so this is 18 to 29, are what they call low trusters. So they think that, you know, most people can't be trusted, and that also most people would try to take advantage of them if they were given the chance. And also that most of the time they believe that people are just looking out for themselves. So, you know, as I mentioned, like it's directly correlated with age. So the older you are, the you know, the less likely you are to believe those things. But it's really that group of 18 to 29-year-olds. So, you know, again, if you sort of if you live in this very individual world where it becomes really hard to connect with people and build that trust, which, by the way, I talked a little about like fast, you know, going at a fast pace, but then also this idea of slow time. Trust comes with time, and it comes from being immersed in slow, protected time. So does critical thinking. So I've been teaching for a long time, and while I absolutely love my students, and I teach in an international classroom, it's really fun. I've noticed this trend where students are coming to me saying, you know, just tell me what's going to be on the exam. And I get it, like they're really fast, right? Like their lives are so fast, they have so much going on, so they just want to get the A and get out, right? And I'm going, stop. You know, if that's what you're after, I'm going to fail you, because I want you to think critically. I want you to stop, and I want you to grapple with this stuff. I want you to say it's confusing, because all of this is, right? So when we live in this like binary world of like, you know, I'm not going to trust this, or like this is my only trusted news source, or you know, I like we're doomed if that's how we're going to be thinking about things. So again, think about like, question things, and you should be questioning things, and that goes with what you see on social media, and it also goes with your own biases that you're walking around the world with, like these little blinders where you say, well, those people think this way, and you know, I don't like those people for that reason. Well, stop and pause and think a little deeper about it, right? So just some reflections from my own life, but then you know, a little bit of data mixed in with that too.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I was going to, and Marco I was going to add a quick follow on to that. Do you have something you were just about to say?
No, I just wanted to add that the problem of trust is really a big problem. I think in general we don't trust each other. Countries don't trust each other. It's exactly what we see now with this whole vaccine rollout and production of COVID vaccines. Is that if people trust each other, we probably could come up with some sort of global coordination framework where we actually make sure that we can roll out this vaccine as fast as possible. But instead of our answer is let's make export controls, don't export them. Let's do trust. Lack of trust is a big problem. I think generally in terms of, I mean, as an advice on, as Catherine said, yeah, you need to question things that you see in social media or anywhere in news. Is what is fact or opinion. I think this is diminishing has been diminishing kind of vanishing, kind of mixed up together a lot in social media over the last years. And I think I would say just trust your instincts to some extent, whether this is now a fact or an opinion, and maybe do an additional research if you think, if you're not sure whether this source of information can be true or is true, or yeah, just don't trust. Again, don't trust every piece of information you see, and maybe try to do your additional research around this and trust your instincts on it.
I will say that in terms of my personal philosophy that I learned the hard way when I used to be on Facebook, and I would receive, messages on my wall, and I know Facebook is now, it's for old people, but Facebook, that was where I was. And I noticed, I'm picking up on the theme of taking a pause. When I would feel a surge of anger and like, I really got to post in response to this thing, like whatever the latest thing was, I'd rip off some sort of, zinger that was sort of directed at kind of nothing and nowhere. I mean, it was just out into the space. I'm not really sure who the them was that I was getting in my, that I was nailing in my text or post. And I guess I've learned, so now I'm suspicious. If my impulse is to instantly react, that's exactly the moment when I stop now. And I've now basically put like a kind of moratorium on not reacting, within the same hour or same day. Why am I doing it? Is it just to make myself feel good? Does somebody need my reaction? Is it even based on full information? Or did I just hear some partial and like inflammatory thing that's meant to get me angry? And so therefore I'm posting and doing kind of exactly what the previous posting was intended to do, which was to generate more heat and more reaction. So now I'm pretty skeptical about things that feel like passionate, heated exchange. I feel it's a little bit like produced, and I'm less likely to engage.
Thank you all for those tips. I want to like group what you've said and bring in some advice just from our center, and that's to look for the sources. So I studied history as an undergrad, that's my specialty, and many of you students in your history classes always have to look for sources. You need to cite. If you're making a claim, you need evidence to back it up. So when you're reading something online, it may be produced out of heat or fanaticism, but always search for an additional thing to prove that. And that being skeptical sounds not like the right recipe for trust, but when you find things, start backing it up, you do build that trust with steeping in it a little bit more. And just to address history, I think maybe we've presented a dismal outlook on the future. It's not the most optimistic, but this also is about optimism and to shine some light on the fact that this event that we're all going through, COVID-19, this very long, public health crisis, isn't the first time that countries and people and societies have faced these sorts of huge issues that have been very life-changing, and that societies have come out of it and learned lessons. So just to bring some perspective for our students, I want to share that before the pandemic hit in 2020, the most consequential event in my life was 9/11. It felt like everything was going to change. I was a student, very young, and I didn't understand, but I felt like everything changed afterward. What about for all of you? What big events were catalysts for societal change in your earlier years? Okay. Let's start with Marco, Catherine, and then Heather.
I mean, obviously, I have to admit, 9/11 was a a big kind of event as well. I mean, even though I grew up in Switzerland, I think on that day everything stopped, and the next day we even didn't have to go to school just because everything was, nobody knew what's happening. So definitely a big change. I think there are a couple of other events. I mean, obviously, I'm not sure whether they really triggered big societal changes, but they definitely caused issues. I mean, the financial crisis in 2007 had so many ripple effects that created problems in terms of, people losing their lives and livelihoods, which subsequently then had a lot of influence on kind of political decisions later on. You see a lot of movements in terms of more protectionism, anti-globalization movements. We have seen in the UK events such as Brexit, where the UK has left a bigger union of countries in Europe without necessarily having any economic gains. In contrast, economics doesn't really matter in those debates anymore nowadays. So there's a lot of kind of changes that at least in my field in economics have triggered kind of change in the way we look at things, how we model things in my field. For instance, the financial crisis actually led to that. A lot of our economic models, we had to say, actually, they might not quite right because we couldn't see this. We couldn't see this crisis happening. But then there are also kind of longer term changes, such as the technological change. To come back to Catherine's case again, in terms of, in my childhood, we didn't have mobile phones, not at all. We also had to, send letters to our friends, and then subsequently, at some point, you have suddenly an iPhone in front of you and smartphones, and constantly connect there with positive effects, because obviously, we are now connected. We can speak to our friends all the time. At the same time, you have all these new negative effects, such as being online all the time, which subsequently has negative effects potentially on your stress and on your mental health. So I think these were probably some of the major trends that I experienced in my lifetime.
I couldn't agree more with all of that. I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and I just remember thinking, I have two older brothers. I was like, my brothers are going to war, and who knows what's going to happen to them. And it was an absolute frenzy. And we're still feeling the ripple effects of that. I mean, you guys don't know a world where we haven't been at war. I mean, wow, that's incredible. Like we're seeing military recruits who weren't born when September 11th happened. So there's so many challenges to your generation, and when boomers like try to put you guys down, don't listen to them, because you guys have had a lot going on. So two things, I'll add two things to that. I'm actually going to go back to Europe for one of them to kind of set the stage for another point. But one is the rise of the internet. So the fact that we went from maybe we had one computer in the house when I was a little kid. My parents were early adopters of the internet, but that was amazing. Then all of a sudden, everybody's sitting with multiple devices in the same room. I mean, it used to just be you had, one little desk with a gigantic computer on it, and you did code in MS-DOS, right? And then we got the internet. Crazy, right? So that's something that I've seen as a major shift in my time. But the other is, I used to live in Austria, and I moved. I didn't grow up in Austria, obviously. I American accent, but I lived there for many years, and one of the things that I realized was, so Austria borders Hungary and 8 other countries, but Hungary. And Hungary used to be part of the Soviet Union. And so in my lifetime, we saw the fall of the Soviet Union. And it's really interesting because if you think about it, you guys probably, hopefully covered this in history class, but there was the Iron Curtain. And I think most Americans think it was like this idea of a barrier between the East and the West, right? Like the communist world and the free democratic world. But it's not true. It was over 4,000 miles of electrified barbed wire that were separating, this whole continent that now, for the most part, is collaborative, has a shared currency. And so I say this because I'm a cyclist. So there I am riding my bike in Austria, and I'm no Magellan, you guys. I get lost. I don't pay attention. I like get caught up in the moment on my bike. fine. So all of a sudden I look up and all the signs are in Hungarian. And my thinking was like, oh my God, you know, if I did this in my own lifetime, I would have been captured. You know, like it wouldn't have been as peaceful as just, you know, going down a bike path. So I say that to say that things change really quickly, and we have to be really careful. And I think, you know, for all the benefits that we have from living in a democratic society, like don't lose your civic engagement because, you know, we just to think about that is an example of a massive shift. You know, I want to encourage you guys just to think beyond yourselves and think about civic engagement. And with that, sorry, Heather, I don't mean to steal time, but one of the things that I like to ask people is, would you rather give up your iPhone or the right to vote? And it's kind of funny to see like older people respond to that, like they kind of laugh at it and they're like, all right, I'll give up my smartphone. But younger people, they're like, yeah, well, what does my vote do? You know, and that's terrifying to me. That scares me, right? So please don't lose sight of the power of informing yourselves and voting and being civically engaged, because things change really quickly. So over to you, Heather.
I actually will leave it right there so we can have more time for Q&A, Tracy. I don't have too much to add.
All right, thank you, Heather. Thank you all for answering my questions. And I want to turn it over to Jessica now so she can bring up some student questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. This first question, he says, hi, my name is Liam, and I'm a 17-year-old high school student who has been homeschooled since 2nd grade. My school, Sage Oak, has an excellent curriculum, and I have live sessions with my teachers every week. I think this has helped me through the pandemic because I don't feel isolated and didn't have to make a transition during this stressful time. Do you foresee perhaps public schools working together with online schools to offer this type of education to make it easier on public school students? And Heather, I'll probably direct that one to you.
Sure. Yes, I do see that. I'm so glad to hear that you had such a good experience. That's fabulous. And you're not alone. I mean, the number of students who've been homeschooled has doubled over the course of the pandemic. I would not be surprised if homeschooling continues to grow. It's now at something like 11% of students are being homeschooled. But even if you're not homeschooled, I do think that kind of partnership where schools, I just think schools are going to be partnering with more organizations, period. Whether it's for tutoring, after school care, new types of staff to come in and help teachers. I could see schools partnering with some online schools, like kind of like your experience, where students will get a combination of classes from their home teacher at their home school and from teachers who are in virtual school. I definitely think that kind of flexibility is going to grow. Does it mean that everybody will get all of this? No, but I think that there's sort of a new era of some kind of experimentation that's going to take hold, at least over the next few years. And then I think schools are going to see what's financially they can afford over time, even after these federal stimulus dollars go away. What do students like? What is quality? And hopefully we're going to see some good changes that really stick.
This next question says, I would like to ask Catherine to elaborate more on trust and actually communicating, because these things are so important, yet commonly lacking. How are these so hard to find, and how could these skills be honed, not just personally, just slowing down, but globally as well, to help create better global connections and stop such high tensions?
That's a huge question. So let me start with an individual basis, and I'll just say, you know, I struggle with this too. Everybody struggles with, you know, especially in a virtual space when you have to have a tough conversation, and we all do in our lives, or we all have to express something that we're feeling, and it gets tough. So, you know, part of it is I think just sort of making space and giving people signals that you're open to hearing things that aren't just sort of easy answers or easy things to talk about. And that again comes with a little bit of time and trying to build trust. How we actually do that, when, you know, this is all we see of our colleagues is like this little window, is something where I think there's there's some power in just asking people more about their lives, and allowing people to share to the degree that they can. So that's different from resolving global tensions, and I understand that, but I think there's a lot about asking just simply what matters to people, and prioritizing that, as opposed to like just checking a box and getting a task done. So I like to call this like full spectrum communication. So instead of just like, did I hit a like, did I add a comment, did I post something, did I send an email, did, whatever it is, like, did I really get at, if this is a really important topic, and somebody just didn't need a quick answer, if they needed and deserved a bigger answer, did I allow space for that? And, think about it in your own lives too. If you really felt like you wanted to elaborate on something, and somebody didn't give you that space, like what would it have meant to you? What would you have said? Because I think the more you can empathize kind of in your own life, or, for yourself and what you're experiencing, the more you can do it for other people.
Great, thank you. This next question says, hello, this question is for anyone who can answer it. Does RAND do any research or work in regards to foreign policy / international relations? If so, are there any comments about recent policy work being done in that regard? And I know RAND does a lot of that, so I don't know if there's one of you that would like to highlight something on that and maybe some resources for this student.
The short answer is yes, a ton. This is absolutely a lot of what we do, and I think the fact that we have our colleague Marco over in the UK is evidence of part of that too. I would just say get in touch with me or any of us over at RAND, or connect, and we'll send over some resources. But you probably have to tell us what you're really interested in, because there is so much on this.
Mm-hmm. Marco, you want to describe RAND Europe?
Yeah, I think, to add to that, I think we do a lot of, foreign policy stuff, and we have also offices in across the world, right? And we have an office in Australia, in Europe, in the UK, and in Brussels, and we do a lot of kind of policy work in these areas for the European Commission, UK government, and also kind of governments in the Middle East and so on. So there's a lot of policy work in that area. And if you're really interested, there's also, I think the RAND website offers you a lot of information on what are some of the topics we are working on, from various, topics within foreign policies, more kind of on the economic side and international economics, or the kind of related topics. There's a huge kind of set of information publicly available. But again, if feel free to reach out to us directly, and we can direct you as well.
For Catherine, what do you recommend for people that are feeling depressed and want help, or if I see someone who seems depressed?
Also a good question. I think it's one that a lot of us are talking about just in our own day-to-day lives. So part of it is the only way that we're, not the only way, but one of the main ways that we're going to get over the stigma that's attached to things like depression and anxiety, the kind of that icky feeling that we don't really want to talk about, or we just want to hide it, is just by being honest with each other. And I'm really encouraged, again, to see your generation, being more upfront about these things. So just ask. I think there's a lot of power in asking and following up with people. And again, that sort of circles back to that whole full spectrum communication. But it's a great question, and it's one where being as forthcoming as we can and lending a hand to people who need it, because we all need it from time to time. Normalizing that is I think going to go a long way.
If you're the one feeling depressed, talking to an adult, talking to a teacher, if you're still in school, schools have become much better at connecting students to mental health services, counseling, treatment, and so forth. So I definitely encourage you to talk to somebody. If you not only friends, but also a trusted adult, to reach out, and hopefully they can connect you with some services. There's lots of services out here right now, and there's a lot of people who are struggling with depression during the pandemic especially. So you're not alone. If this is about you or if it's about a friend, I hope that you encourage them to talk to somebody.
Thank you. This will be our final question. Why did you decide to work at a think tank, and what do you like about your job?
I'll start on this one. Because when I got, I really like research. I I like writing, I like looking at data and thinking about what the numbers mean, basically. I mean, to put it in its simplest terms. And all of those are ingredients that I'm doing, if not every day, at least every week. And I love working with people. And so a place like RAND and other think tanks, other research organizations are often very team-based. Like there's no project where I'm working by myself. And I did not want to work by myself, which was not always, but more if you want to go into academia, be a professor. The work in academia tends to be, not always, tends to be a little bit more solo. And so I was really drawn to a job that was still doing research but wasn't in a university. And I love the sort of fast pace and policy orientation of a place like RAND. Marco, Casey?
I think, I mean, I can only, underpin what you say, Heather, in terms of, working in an environment where you can, look at data, try to build stories around data, and subsequently, try to improve, decision and policy making with your research. I think one big aspect for me is also like learning from my colleagues and learning about the fantastic and interesting research they do. I think this is something at RAND is just incredible. I mean, the work that Heather and Katrin does is just reading a lot of information about that makes you feel like, oh wow, this is so much interesting work going on, where you can actually learn on a daily basis as a researcher yourself and from your colleagues is amazing. And obviously also the kind of teamwork. I've been I don't know how many projects a year I work on, maybe 8 or 10, up to 10. And I'm mostly not working with the same people over this year. So there's always someone else with a different background, with a different kind of methodological or subject matter expertise, and it's a continuous learning experience.
Yeah, I'll just say I came to RAND because it's totally committed to doing rigorous and objective work. And in today's day and age where, kind of almost anybody can be bought, I wanted to totally get away from that. And we're also not going to solve any problems without working on those kinds of interdisciplinary teams that Heather talked about. And it turns out when you get people who get to rally around that kind of mission, it attracts really nice, kind people. And so it's a huge part of our day to day, and kindness is cool. So that's my parting message.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I have one more question to get in. I know we're right at the end, but from Raheel, he asked, are there any opportunities for high schoolers at RAND? And if so, how could we get involved?
We do not have a high school internship. We do have a summer associate program that's targeted for a little bit later age. And so if you were to Google RAND and summer associates, that would be your chance to apply in. But I'm sorry to say that we don't have an internship targeted at the high school age. I hope if you're still interested once you're in college, that if you're interested in doing research, please do look at our summer associate program. That's been a fantastic way to get experience, and a number of people who were summer associates have come on to work at RAND later.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful panel. Tracy, thank you so much for your excellent moderation. I'm going to turn this back over to you. And thank you to our students for all of your great questions too. I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today. That was such a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much, Tracy, for moderating. And
Good.
again,
Yeah, Tracy, you did a nice job.
I echo
nice
Jessica to thank our students and teachers and the Boone Foundation for making it all possible. So we'll have to have you back. This is a continuing conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.